Last week, just as I was about to get remarried, I went to visit my late husband's grave. While I was cleaning his photograph on the headstone, a little boy approached me and said, "Ma'am, this man is still alive. He is at my house," shaking. I followed him, and when I opened the door, I was petrified. It was a late summer afternoon in Seattle. Under a fine drizzle, the wind from the harbor blew through the pine trees of the cemetery. There are chills that do not come from the weather, but from the human soul when standing in front of a grave where no one is buried under the earth. My name is Sarah Miller, and I am 35 years old. Before the tragedy, I was just the wife of David Hayes, CEO of North Star Shipping. Outsiders called him the big boss of the port. To me, he was just a husband who often suffered from stomach aches and who, upon returning home at night, preferred a good bowl of beef stew with a piece of crusty bread. On the night of the 18th of June 2021, the yacht Red Horizon caught fire off the coast of Puget Sound. David was attending a party with business partners on board. When I ran to the pier, the fire had already stained a corner of the water red. They held me back so I would not step forward. I screamed until my voice went hoarse, asking where my husband was, but no one could answer me. After 3 days of searching, they only handed me a sealed evidence bag containing a charred piece of his jacket, the watch I had given him, and a part of his wedding ring deformed by the heat. There was no body, not a single bone, no words of farewell. Even so, my husband's family erected a cenotaph, an empty tomb in his honor. Eleanor, my husband's stepmother, stood in front of the headstone crying until she almost fainted. She took my hand and, with a broken voice, told me, "Sarah, the water is too cold. If we cannot find his body, at least David must have a place to return to. Don't push yourself anymore." Poor thing. I looked at my husband's photo on the stone. In the picture, he was wearing a navy blue suit. His gaze was deep but bright. I listened to Eleanor. I listened to the sighs of the relatives, but in my heart, there was only one sentence. As long as I do not see the person, I will not believe it. After the ceremony, the family lawyer brought documents on several occasions. They said I had to sign David's declaration of death to facilitate the processing of the estate, the shares, and the management of the company. I pushed the papers back. I refused to sign. Eleanor was stunned. "Are you planning to embrace his shadow your whole life?" I replied very quietly. "If you call David a shadow, I am sorry. To me, he is still my husband." From that day on, people pitied me less and grew more impatient with me. North Star Shipping, after David's disappearance, wobbled like a boat with a broken rudder. He had told me once, "Sarah, this company is not just money. It is my father's sweat. It is half my life. It is the bread and butter of hundreds of families." Back then, I listened and nodded, never imagining that one day it would be me occupying his chair. I learned to be a CEO in meetings as tense as guitar strings, under the distrustful gaze of the shareholders and the whispers of the employees in the hallways. There were those who said what a woman would know about cargo ships and ports. I heard it all, and it hurt, of course. But in this life, people's tongues are like the waves of the open sea. You cannot force them to be quiet just because you are tired. At night, I would open my husband's old notebook and read a page where he had written, "The southern shipping route must be maintained at all costs." As I caressed that line, my tears fell. In those days, Eleanor always played the part of a kind mother. She would order chicken soup to be made for me. She would put her hand on my shoulder and say, "Seeing you carry all this breaks my heart. Why don't you let Ryan help you a little? After all, he is David's brother." Ryan Hayes was my husband's younger half-brother. He was 4 years younger than David. Soft-spoken and in front of anyone, he called me sister-in-law with great sweetness. "Sarah, consider me family. I don't want to fight over anything. I just want to preserve North Star for my brother David." It sounded very proper, but David had warned me once. Ryan smiles a lot, but his eyes rarely do. Don't hate him, but don't trust him either unless there is paper and ink involved. At the time, I joked with him, saying that being a CEO made him see everyone as a contract with hidden trap clauses. He let out a loud laugh and replied that caution is never a bad thing, especially with those who sit at your own table. 3 years passed, and I continued to religiously visit his empty grave. Every time I cleaned his photo, I told him how the company was doing. As long as I could stand on my 2 feet, North Star Shipping would not fall into the hands of strangers. That morning, I entered the boardroom on the 17th floor of the corporate headquarters. Through the glass windows, the Seattle port looked blurry from the rain. At the head of the table was David's chair. In 3 years, I never felt it belonged to me. I placed my hand on the backrest and heard my heartbeat very clearly. David, I murmured, until you return. I do not have permission to give up. The memorial dinner for my father-in-law's passing that year fell on a day of heavy rain. The Hayes family estate in an upscale neighborhood had its lights on early. In the courtyard, the rain dripped from the pine trees onto the brick paving. In the kitchen, the aroma of smoked brisket, roasted potatoes, mac and cheese, and a classic American pot roast rose deliciously. When he was alive, Thomas Hayes loved that the dinner in his honor featured all the traditional comfort foods. He used to say that someone returning from far away didn't need exotic delicacies, just a good hot plate and to have the family gathered. Remembering his words, every year I went down to the kitchen myself to season the dishes and set the table. Eleanor always said, "You are already the CEO of the company, leave the kitchen stuff to the staff." A woman who is too capable also suffers. Her words sounded compassionate, but every letter seemed to have a tiny hook. I just smiled and replied, "He liked homemade food. I will do what is in my hands." Eleanor was sitting at the round dining table in an elegant dark velvet dress, her hair pinned up, passing a pearl necklace through her fingers. Seeing her, anyone would think she was the perfect mother, the devoted second wife of the household. But after 3 years living alone in that house, I understood that there are tears that do not fall out of pain, but at the exact moment they are needed to soften others. Ryan arrived later than the rest. He wore a crisp white shirt, brought a bottle of expensive bourbon, and upon entering, bowed his head before the portrait. "Dad, I arrived late. Don't hold it against me. Lately, there is a lot of work at the company." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. I, who was placing a glass on the table, stopped for a moment. Yes, there was a lot of work, but largely because everything had gotten complicated since Ryan's people appeared in the departments. Eleanor wiped the tears from her eyes and said, "Seeing that you two still take care of North Star, I am sure your father rests in peace." Ryan turned to me with a soft voice. "Sarah, you have lost a lot of weight these days. If David saw you putting everything on your back, he would die of sorrow." I looked at him and answered, "I can still do it." He smiled slightly. "I know you are very capable, but a shipping company is not something a single person can sustain. You are a woman, and you just suffered a massive blow. I just fear you will burn out." That sentence sounded like concern, but in the middle of a family dinner, in front of the relatives, it was equivalent to saying that I did not have the strength to retain my position. "Ryan is right," an uncle chimed in. "No matter how smart a woman is, she needs a man to back her up. Sarah is young. Maintaining the whole Hayes empire is very difficult." I left the silverware on the table, and before I could speak, Eleanor sighed. "Sarah, I tell you this from the bottom of my heart. I thank you for taking care of the company for David, but Ryan is also a Hayes. He is David's blood brother. Why don't you let him lend you a hand?" Hearing the words blood and family, a knot formed in my throat. I was David's wife, the one who signed the papers for him, the one who had endured every corporate storm for 3 years. And yet, for not sharing their blood, I would always be an outsider. I spoke in a low voice. "Eleanor, I am not stopping Ryan from helping in the company, but executive control, finances, and port data must be governed by the board of directors. Powers cannot be transferred just because of an after-dinner comment." The atmosphere in the dining room tensed instantly. Ryan waved his hands quickly. "Sister-in-law, don't misunderstand me. I am not asking for power. I just see that you push yourself too hard, and I want to lighten your load. If you don't trust me, let it be." Incredible. With a single sentence, I went from being someone who defends principles to being the paranoid and petty sister-in-law. Eleanor left her glass on the table. The faint sound of crystal against wood chilled my soul. "Sarah, I don't blame you, but you must remember that in this house, you are not the only one who suffers for David. Ryan lost a brother, I lost a son. Your pain is 1, mine is 10. I lowered my gaze. If I had been the old Sarah, I would have apologized immediately. But these 3 years had taught me something. Not everyone who cries is the one who suffers the most. I replied, "I have never thought that only I suffer, but I cannot do the opposite of what David asked me just out of grief." Eleanor looked at me with reddened eyes. "What did he ask you?" I looked up. "He asked me that the company's affairs be kept clear, with paper and ink, and that with family I should be even stricter, because leniency is the biggest hole in the hull of a ship." Ryan let out a small chuckle, though his smile grew tense. David was always so careful, sometimes too much, turning his family into strangers. That sentence sent a shiver down my spine. I watched him as he leaned over to serve his mother a piece of brisket, as if he hadn't said anything serious. The dinner ended in forced awkwardness. The relatives left, and Eleanor went upstairs to rest. I went down to the kitchen to help the housekeeper clean up. As I passed through the back hallway, I heard Ryan's voice on the porch. Yes, let the pressure build. The more she tries to hold on, the more impatient the shareholders will get. Don't squeeze too hard just yet. I stopped dead in my tracks behind the wooden door. I didn't hear what was being said on the other end of the line, only Ryan lowering his voice. Relax. She is a woman who has spent 3 years clinging to her husband's grave. A couple of articles in the press will be enough to make people doubt her. I squeezed the dish towel I was holding in my hands. Outside, the rain beat against the roof. Inside the house, the aroma of dinner lingered, which seemed warm, but in reality, it chilled me to the bone. I turned around in silence, without going out to confront him. An old proverb says, "You can know a person's face, but not their heart." However, sometimes the heart doesn't need to show itself completely. A single crack is enough to see how dark it is inside. That night, I stood for a long time in front of the family altar, honoring my father-in-law and David's photo. Eleanor kept up her kind facade, and Ryan continued to call me sister-in-law with a honeyed voice. But I began to understand that in this house they didn't need to throw me out the door. They just needed to slowly leave me without a place to stand. Monday morning, I arrived at the company when the sky was still gray. The overnight rain had not dried, and a long line of semi-trucks waited at the port entrance. The distant sound of ship horns echoed heavily. North Star Shipping's headquarters were right on the waterfront. From the 17th floor, you could look directly out at the docks. In the past, David used to stand by the glass window, pointing at the yellow cranes and telling me, "Look, every one of those shipping containers is the livelihood of many people. A boss who only looks at the money sooner or later sinks." I entered the meeting room with that phrase ringing in my ears. On the table, a red folder was placed in front of the chairman's chair. Mark, the head of logistics, looked pale. "Sarah, Continental Freight just sent a document canceling the contract for the Seattle to Anchorage route." I opened the file. An $8 million contract about to be signed in its final addendum, and they were pulling out. The reason sounded very corporate: adjustment in transportation strategy. But looking at the last line, I saw they were transferring their operations to Pacific Blue Port, Michael Sterling's port. I put the papers down. "What is the real reason?" Mark looked around and lowered his voice. "They say they don't trust us because of internal instability. Someone told them the board of directors was going to change. The silence in the room was absolute." I looked at the faces of those present. Some took notes without looking up. Others avoided my gaze. The rumor about the leadership change had barely been hinted at by Ryan at the family dinner, and the next morning, the clients already knew. Bad news travels faster than a courier in rush hour. Before I could process it, Teresa, the chief financial officer, walked in with an even more tense expression. "Sarah, First Cascadia Bank just suspended the disbursement of the $40 million credit line. They demand a justification regarding management risks." I frowned. "What management risks?" Teresa handed me her phone. There was an email with an anonymous letter attached, claiming that I frequently went to talk alone at my husband's grave, showing signs of prolonged obsession and a lack of lucidity for large-scale financial decisions. I let out a laugh, but my throat tasted bitter. Visiting my husband's grave was now proof of insanity. No one dared to answer. Victor, the head of operations, sighed. "That's not all. The fuel supplier also changed their terms. They demand a $2.5 million upfront payment for this month's batch, or they won't refuel the 3 cargo ships docked right now." I looked at the tracking board. Those ships were supposed to head out for the central route. If we were delayed, we would face chain reaction fines. A single tight knot and the whole ship runs out of oxygen. I asked. "They always gave us 45 days of credit. Why are they changing it today?" Victor shook his head. "They say they heard there are problems at North Star and they don't want to risk it." Rumors again. I stood up and walked to the glass window. Down below, the trucks looked like exhausted ants. I clearly saw an invisible hand choking North Star Shipping. No noise, no frontal attacks, just planting fear in the clients, pulling away the banks, alienating the suppliers, and alarming the shareholders. At that moment, the door opened, and Ryan walked in wearing a light blue shirt and holding a folder, looking worried. The exemplary brother who suffered for the company. "Sarah, I found out about the bank and came running. Are you okay?" I turned around. You found out pretty fast. He hesitated but smiled. I have some contacts in finance. They tipped me off so we could be prepared. Arthur, a minor shareholder at the end of the table, chimed in. If Ryan has contacts, it would be ideal for him to talk to the bank. To tell the truth, right now the market needs to see a man from the Hayes family stepping up. I looked at him. Do you mean to say that after 3 years here I am still not part of the Hayes family? The man got nervous. Don't misunderstand me, but you are a woman. You just lost your husband and there are rumors circulating about your state of health. He left the sentence hanging in the air, but everyone understood. I was a widowed woman, supposedly unstable, and above all, a stranger in a family that only trusted blood. Ryan hurried to intervene. Sarah, Arthur didn't mean that. Everyone is just worried about you. Let's do this. Let me temporarily handle the relationships with banks and major clients. You remain the CEO. I will just support you from behind. I found it funny. Support from behind, but with his hands already gripping the back of my chair. I replied, I appreciate it, Ryan, but the delegation of power is not decided by emotions in a boardroom. Any proposal requires a formal document, liability limits, and risk control. North Star is not a flea market where anyone just walks in to collect cash. Some lowered their heads. Ryan kept smiling, but his eyes darkened. Always so strict. I just fear that by clinging to the rules we will lose the chance to save the company. I stared right at him. Companies die from breaking the rules much faster than from being slow. The meeting lasted more than 3 hours. We formed a crisis team. We called every client, sent letters to the bank, renegotiated the fuel. I spoke until my throat went dry, but with every call, I realized the rumors had already spread like oil on water. Around noon, the PR team sent me several press articles. The headlines were polite but ruthless. Is the CEO of North Star shipping ready after her family tragedy? Shipping companies face the risk of emotional leadership. One article even published a photo of me in front of David's cenotaph, secretly taken from a distance. I stared at the photo for a long time. That day, I only went to clean my husband's grave, and in the hands of others, my longing had been turned into a weapon against me. As evening fell, Gabriel Mitchell, the corporate lawyer, arrived. He had been a college classmate of David's and later legal counsel for the company. Walking in, he dropped a stack of printed newspapers on the table. Sarah, someone is manufacturing a psychological profile to push you out of your position. I poured him a glass of water. My hand so tired it trembled. I already figured. Gabriel looked at me. Do you suspect anyone? I stayed silent for a moment. Outside, the sky was getting dark, and the yellowish lights of the port were turning on. I have many suspicions, but no proof. I will just be a hysterical woman in their eyes, Gabriel sighed. Then we have to find proof. I looked at David's photo on the desk. He smiled with the same calm as always, as if by turning around and looking again, he would open the door and walk in. I spoke slowly. I am not afraid of losing in business, Gabriel. I am only terrified that the stab in the back comes from someone sitting at my own table. He didn't answer. There are phrases that do not need comforting because their own weight hurts enough. That night, when almost all the lights in the company had been turned off, I was still in the office. Outside, the ship horns faded into the distance. On the computer screen was the list of contracts at risk. On my phone, a text message from Eleanor. If you are tired, let Ryan assume the weight. Don't overexert yourself and end up ruining David's legacy. I read the sentence over and over and put the phone face down. They weren't going to snatch the company from me in one pull. They just wanted to exhaust me, make outsiders doubt, use family advice to push me until I let go of the wheel myself. But they forgot something. When a woman has kept her husband in her heart for 3 years, she doesn't fall to her knees so easily in the face of a financial storm. 3 days after that tense meeting, Ryan brought Michael Sterling to North Star Shipping. That day, the sun was shining in Seattle after the heavy rains. The light poured through the large windows and illuminated the long mahogany table. I occupied the chairman's seat surrounded by financial reports in red numbers. The ships weren't sailing. The bank was still withholding capital. 2 major clients had paused negotiations. The company was like someone being suffocated. It was still breathing, but every gasp hurt. Ryan walked in first, wearing a calculated smile and an air of urgency. Sarah, I invited Michael for a chat. He comes in good faith to help us in this difficult time. Behind him walked in a man in his 40s. Michael Sterling was tall, elegant, wearing a light gray suit and impeccable hair. He didn't rush to shake my hand, just nodded slightly. "Hello, Sarah. I have heard a lot about you. We finally have the opportunity to talk seriously." I stood up, maintaining a professional distance. "Good afternoon, Michael. In the office. I would prefer you call me Sarah or Mrs. Miller out of formality." He smiled as if my coldness amused him. "Agreed. Excuse my presumption." Michael's Pacific Blue port had been North Star's biggest rival for years. David used to tell me that Michael didn't make much noise, but when he set his sights on something, he didn't let go. That phrase resonated clearly in my mind at that moment. Ryan offered him a chair and personally poured him a coffee. "Sarah, Michael knows the bank froze our credit. They are willing to guarantee us $30 million up front and will let us use the auxiliary dock at Pacific Blue for 3 months. That way, our 3 ships will be able to sail." I looked at the proposal on the table. The conditions were perfect. So perfect they were absurd. Low interest rates, flexible terms, minimal port costs. In this life, free cheese is always sitting on a mousetrap. I asked, "And what does Pacific Blue ask in return?" Michael intertwined his fingers on the table, speaking slowly. "For now, a strategic alliance. North Star has the fleet and international clients. Pacific Blue has the port, warehousing, and cash flow. If we shake hands, we survive together." I took a sip of my cold tea. Rivals for years suddenly want to save each other. It's touching. Ryan rushed to smile. "You are being unfair to him. In business, there are no eternal enemies. Besides, Michael had great respect for David." Michael looked at David's photo in the corner of the office. David was a man of great integrity. I respected him sincerely. It would be a real shame if the company he left behind collapsed. Hearing real shame, my blood ran cold. Coming from him, my husband's company sounded like a relic about to be sold at a pawn shop. The meeting ended without signatures. I said I needed the board's review. Ryan looked a bit annoyed but kept up his facade. "Review it well. I know you are careful." That same evening, Eleanor invited me to dinner. When I arrived at the house, I saw Michael Sterling sitting in the living room having coffee and artisan chocolates. Eleanor wore an elegant light blue silk dress, smiling sweetly as if nothing disturbed her peace. "Sarah, you're here." I invited Michael to dinner. If he has the willingness to help the company, we should be grateful. I looked at Ryan, who avoided my eyes while peeling a mandarin orange for his mother. The dinner included baked sea bass, fried calamari, garlic butter shrimp, and other dishes, everything David loved. I don't know if Eleanor did it on purpose, but sitting at the table and seeing the empty seat next to me, my heart ached dully. She served me a piece of fish. "Eat, you have lost a lot of weight. A woman alone carrying a company suffers too much, no matter how capable she is." Michael intervened smoothly. "Strong women are usually strong because they have no one who allows them to be weak. But if someone were by your side, you wouldn't have to torture yourself like this." I set down my silverware. "Michael, I think it is a bit early to have personal conversations at my family dinner." He didn't get angry, just smiled. "My apologies. I saw you so overwhelmed that I spoke out of turn." Eleanor sighed. "Sarah, I know you remain loyal to David, but he has been missing for 3 years. The living cannot cling to the cold forever. You will end up burning your hands. I say this from the heart. If there is a good man willing to take care of you and save North Star, you should think about it." I looked at her. "What exactly do you want me to think about?" Ryan set his glass down, his voice soft as a breeze. "Sarah, if you and Michael became a family, the help from Pacific Blue would be legitimate. The banks would relax, and the shareholders would stop demanding your removal." I felt a knot in my throat. The entire table fell silent. Only the clinking of the housekeeper's silverware in the kitchen could be heard. I asked slowly, "Are you asking me to marry Michael?" Eleanor rubbed her eyes. "No one is forcing you. I am just worrying about you and David's legacy. You are young. Are you going to bury your life next to an empty grave?" I let out a stifled chuckle. "You just said you aren't forcing me, but every word of yours corners me in front of my husband's altar." Michael looked at me, lowering his tone. "Sarah, I am not asking you to forget David. I just want to offer you a way out. A woman alone fighting against the market. It's exhausting." I looked him in the eyes. A polite and calm gaze, but deep down there was something dark, like the water at the bottom of a well. I replied, "I appreciate it, but I still don't need anyone to lead me by the hand." The dinner ended in coldness. They call it keeping up appearances. I went up to the family altar to light a candle for David. The thin smoke floated in front of his portrait. Downstairs, I heard Eleanor whisper to Ryan, "This girl is still too stubborn." Ryan answered, "If she's stubborn, we'll just have to soften her heart first." I stood motionless in front of the altar, watching the red wax drip. They say fire tests gold and adversity tests people. But I began to understand that in the Hayes family, adversity did not come alone. Someone was lighting the fire to force me to thank the arsonist. The extraordinary shareholders meeting took place on a Saturday morning in the large conference room of North Star Shipping. Outside, the blazing sun reflected on the glass windows. I walked in and saw that almost all the major shareholders were present. Those faces that once laughed with David now looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. Ryan was on the right side of the long table. In front of him was a thick stack of documents. He stood up when he saw me, using his honeyed tone. "Sarah, take a seat. We all just want to hear the plan to save North Star." I pulled out my chair and sat down. "Then, let's begin." Arthur, a veteran shareholder, took the floor. As an old friend of my father-in-law, he maintained some respect. "Sarah, I speak to you with sincerity. These past years you have maintained the company with effort, but the situation has changed. The ships are stopped, the bank is holding the money, contracts are being canceled. If liquidity doesn't come in, North Star won't survive." Another chimed in, "We need stability. You cling to David's disappearance, and it is understandable that your mental state is affected. But the company doesn't run on feelings." I stared right at him. "Explain to me exactly how my mental state affects my decisions." He coughed awkwardly. "It's not a specific decision, it's your image as a leader. The press publishes it, partners read it. Who is going to trust us like this?" My chest burned. They were using my pain as proof, my visits to my husband's grave as evidence to doubt my sanity. Truly, in this life, you don't need a knife to make someone bleed. Ryan stood up right on cue. "Gentlemen, I will speak plainly. Right now, there is only one quick solution to save the shipping line. Michael Sterling's Pacific Blueport is willing to back us with $30 million, open their auxiliary dock to us, support us with fuel, and bring the bank back to the negotiating table," Arthur asked immediately. "In exchange for what?" Ryan looked at me in feigned discomfort. "Michael wants a sufficiently strong bond. If Sarah and he join in marriage, both parties will be family, and any collaboration will be legitimate. North Star is saved, the shareholders calm down, and the employees keep their jobs." The room filled with murmurs. I sat perfectly still, digging my fingernails into my palms until it hurt. A middle-aged female shareholder said, "It's not a bad idea either. You are young. David has been missing for 3 years. The living have to keep living." I turned to her. "My husband still has no buried body," she sighed. "But we cannot let the whole company die for someone we don't know is dead or alive." That sentence was like a slap in the face. I wanted to ask her, "If the man in that empty grave were your husband, would you say it so lightly?" But I swallowed hard. In this room, if I raised my voice, they would call it a lack of control. But if she doesn't accept, Ryan left the sentence hanging in the air, the board will have to find a way to temporarily change the leadership. I don't want to take my brother's place. But if the situation demands it. How ironic. The one who wants to steal your chair always says they are being forced to sit in it. I asked. "You've prepared yourself very well, haven't you?" From the rescue plan to my dismissal, everything was on the table. Ryan flushed. "You are being unfair to me. I do it for the company." Arthur tapped the table with his fingers. "Sarah, honestly, do you have another alternative?" I looked around. No one was on my side. Some genuinely felt pity, others feared for their money, and others had already been bought by Ryan. The whole room was a net, and I was the fish cornered at the bottom. That afternoon, I returned to the Hayes family home. Eleanor was in front of David's altar, wiping away tears with a handkerchief. Seeing me, she immediately said, "You see? The shareholders are not family, and yet they worry. You are David's wife. Are you going to let his company fall?" I was so exhausted I didn't even take off my shoes. "Do you really want me to marry Michael?" She turned around with red eyes. "I want you to save your husband's life's work. Remarrying is not treason. You do it for him." I let out a small laugh as tears welled up. "Marrying someone else for the sake of my husband. It sounds very noble coming from your mouth." Eleanor adopted a severe tone. "Don't be insolent. Being faithful is good. But being faithful to the point of destroying the estate is obstinacy. You are at the top now. Now you have to think about the hundreds of people who depend on you. I looked at David's portrait. He remained with that calm expression, as if he heard everything without being able to say a word. That night, Michael Sterling sent me the prenuptial agreement. I read every line with freezing hands. There was a clause stipulating that after the marriage, for stability and strategic consolidation, I would grant him proxy voting rights for the majority of my shares for 5 years. I held the papers with a bitter smile. I hadn't even put on the wedding dress yet, and they had already measured the size of the cage. I sat in David's old office. His fountain pen was still in the drawer. His old notebook opened to the page where he wrote, "As long as there are people left in North Star, there will be hope." I caressed that phrase. Outside, the rain pelted the glass windows. I remembered the nights when he would clutch his stomach in pain, but still order the driver to take him to the port to check the refrigerated warehouses. I remembered his calloused hands and his joking voice. "You always worry too much. I'm still very strong. Strong." And yet he left and didn't return for 3 years. I cried for a long time, then wiped my face and called Ryan. "Ryan, I agree to meet with Michael to plan the engagement." On the other side, there was a silence of several seconds before his voice lit up. "Sarah, it's the right thing to do. David would surely want you to do this." I closed my eyes. "But I have one condition. The engagement ceremony will be in 1 week. I need to get the company's affairs in order and go to David's grave to tell him." Ryan answered hastily. "Done. I will arrange it. 1 week is enough time to invite the shareholders, banks, and media, and do it in style." I hung up. In the room, only the sound of the rain and the smell of old paper remained. I knew that from that moment, they thought I had lost. But I didn't say yes to marry Michael. I said yes because I needed 7 more days. 7 days to breathe, to check every crack, to secure North Star shipping before they chained me to that open trap with a wedding ring. The next morning, I drove alone to the cemetery by the sea. I didn't tell Eleanor or Ryan or the driver. There are apologies that can only be given alone. With too many people, tears become a spectacle to be judged. That day in Seattle, a very fine drizzle was falling. It wasn't a storm, just water sliding down the glass, persistent as a sadness that clings to you and refuses to let go. The road to the cemetery was deserted, flanked by timber pines bent by the wind. In the distance, the whistle of the ships came from the port. It sounded familiar, but piercing. I parked at the entrance, took a bouquet of white flowers out of the trunk, a box of artisanal fudge from a local market, a small bottle of bourbon, and a gray towel. The fudge was David's favorite. Whenever he came back from a trip down the coast, he would bring some. He would break off a small piece of fudge and frown. Too sweet, but delicious. A man's life sometimes needs a little sweetness, so it doesn't dry up like salted fish. I used to scold him. "Your stomach hurts and you eat sweets." He would laugh. Having my wife to remind me, what do I have to fear? Thinking of that, I squeezed the box tightly. He always said he had someone to remind him. And now I had spent 3 years reminding a simple photograph. David's cenotaph was in a corner of the cemetery, facing the water. The black granite headstone was wet. His photo under the glass had a thin layer of water. His face looked serene, as if he were watching me from very far away. I knelt down and laid the flowers out neatly. "David, I'm here." The wind blew, and my dark clothes clung to my body. I used the towel to clean the headstone and the drops from the glass. With every wipe, his face looked clearer, that same serene but determined look he had in the boardroom. The more I cleaned it, the more my soul broke. "David, forgive me." I said it very softly, afraid of losing control if I spoke out loud. "Yesterday I agreed to meet with Michael to arrange our engagement. In a week they will announce it to all the shareholders, the press, and the banks. I know if you heard me, you would be angry." I discussed myself. I opened the box of fudge and placed it next to the little bottle of bourbon. The sweet aroma mixed with the smell of wet earth. But my love, North Star can no longer breathe. The ships are stranded, the banks are blocking the money, contracts are being canceled, and they want to replace me. They say I live tied to the ghost of a dead man, that I am not sane, that I am just a woman clinging to the power of the Hayes family. Tears fell on the back of my hands. "I can bear being insulted, being belittled, but I cannot bear your shipping line sinking. It is your company, your father's sweat, the livelihood of many people. You once told me that a boss who only saves their own name doesn't deserve to be one. I stood up in front of his photo. I am not marrying to forget you. I am just doing what I can to save the ship while there is still water, but I feel like I am bailing out water with blood-stained hands. I stayed like that for a long time. The rain soaked through my clothes, and my knees grew numb against the cold stone. The wind whistled through the pines, and seagulls shrieked in the distance. Then I heard some children arguing quietly behind a pine trunk. You go ask her. Why me? She's crying. Just ask her quietly. Those candies look really good. I wiped my tears and turned around. A short distance away, several little heads were peeking out. They wore worn-out clothes, muddy sneakers, and were very thin. Seeing me, they backed away scared, except for one who stayed a few steps ahead. He looked about 11 or 12 years old, his skin tanned by the sea sun, his hair short and uneven, wearing a jacket that was huge on him, as if borrowed from an adult. He held a crumpled plastic bag in his hand. He looked at me, looked at the box of fudge on the grave, with an expression that was a mix of hunger and fear. I asked him, "What are you doing here?" He got scared and shook his head vigorously. "I wasn't going to take it, ma'am. I was waiting for you to leave to ask you. My grandma says food from offerings has to be asked for. That taking it without permission makes the dead angry." That answer softened my heart. "What is your name?" "Leo. I live in the fishing village on the other side of the sound." I looked behind him. The other children were still hiding, their eyes shining with hunger. I took several more candies from my purse and handed them to Leo. "Here, share them. But remember, the next time you want something, always ask the family first." Leo received them with both hands, making a very polite bow. "Yes, thank you, ma'am." He made a move to leave, but his gaze stopped on the photograph on the headstone. The boy stood still. At first, it was just a glance. Then he took a step closer and squinted to get a better look. The wind ruffled his hair, and his childish face became strangely serious. I felt my heart skip a beat. "What are you looking at?" Leo pointed to David's photo with a hesitant voice. "Ma'am, is the man in the photo your husband?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, my husband." He scratched his head and looked at me, and then at the photo again. His lips trembled as if he was afraid I would scold him if he said something inappropriate. "But it's just that this man looks a lot like Uncle Seven, the one who lives at my house." I froze. The drizzle kept falling. I felt my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I asked with a hoarse voice, "What did you just say?" Leo hugged his little bag of candies to his chest, speaking softly. "I said the man in the photo looks a lot like Uncle Seven, the one who lives at my grandma's house." I looked at the boy in front of me and felt as if the sea wind had struck me directly in the chest. A poor kid asking for candy could say anything at random. Kids seeing a resemblance in people is common, but for some reason, his sentence made my legs turn to ice. I tried to keep my voice as calm as possible. "Who is Uncle Seven? Tell me more." Leo looked toward where his friends were hiding. Perhaps he was afraid of talking too much, or that I would get angry for comparing a deceased person to someone alive. "Uncle Seven lives at my grandma's house. He's not from our town. My grandma rescued him in the marshlands a long time ago." My heart beat faster. "How long ago?" Leo frowned, counting on his dirty fingers. "A long time. I was in 3rd grade, now I'm going into 6th. It must be about 3 years. 3 years. Hearing those 2 words sucked me back to the night of the yacht in flames. 3 years since David disappeared. 3 years since they erected a grave with no body. 3 years living like the guardian of a door that I didn't know would ever open. I asked, "What is Uncle Seven's real name?" Leo shook his head. "We don't know. My grandma gave him that name. When she saved him, he didn't remember anything. You ask his name and he doesn't know. You ask where he lives and he doesn't know. He just grabs his head and shakes." I swallowed hard. "What happened to him?" "He was hurt really bad, ma'am. My grandma says that night the water was very rough. In the morning, she found him trapped in the mud in the reeds, covered in dirt, his clothes torn, his head bleeding, and a burn on his back. The fisherman took him to the clinic, but he didn't have any ID or a phone. I gripped the edge of my coat. The cemetery was still empty. The rain fell on my shoulders. I was soaked, but I didn't feel cold anymore. And why didn't he go look for his family? Leo looked down, gently kicking the wet earth with his sneaker. He is really scared of strangers. Once, 2 men came who looked like they were from a charity. They said they wanted to take him to treat him for free, but as soon as Uncle Seven heard the voice of one of them, he hid under the bed shaking in panic. My grandma thought it was weird and wouldn't let them take him. A knot formed in my throat. If that really was David, then someone had already looked for him. And not to save him, but to take him who knows where. I got down to Leo's eye level. Look closely at this photo. Does Uncle Seven really look like the man in the picture? Leo walked closer to the headstone. He looked at David for a long time. The expression of a candy-craving kid vanished, replaced by genuine confusion. He looks a lot like him, ma'am. But Uncle Seven is thinner, darker, with patchy beard growth, and his hair is longer. The one in the photo is very clean. He looks like a rich man. My Uncle Seven looks like a sailor the waves have beaten up a lot. I felt a pang of pain. The man who once wore tailored suits in front of shareholders, who commanded silence in the boardroom with just a look. If he was still alive and was as Leo described, I didn't dare to imagine it. I asked him with a trembling voice, "Does he have any marks on his body? A scar? An injury or something he always keeps?" Leo looked up instantly. Yes. Behind his left shoulder, he has a long scar. My grandma says he got burned or cut with a piece of iron. And he has a broken, burned watch. The strap is almost broken off. But if anyone touches it, he gets really mad. Once I hid it from him to play a joke, and he couldn't find it. He spent the whole afternoon sitting on the porch with red eyes. My grandma gave me a huge scolding. She told me that even if we are poor, we cannot play with other people's memories. My ears buzzed, a scar behind the left shoulder. When David was 32, a worker got trapped in a refrigerated warehouse at the port. David ran to pull him out, and a piece of burning metal struck his back. I was the one who applied ointment to that scar for weeks, and the charred watch was my birthday gift. After the fire, they told me they had found a watch of his among the debris, but what they gave me in the sealed bag was just the destroyed face, with no strap. I was too devastated to think clearly and ask why it wasn't complete. I dug my fingers into the stone next to the grave. Does he ever say anyone's name? Leo tilted his head thoughtfully. The rain formed little droplets in his messy hair. Yes, ma'am. When he has nightmares, he says a name. Even though I don't hear it well, I think he says Sarah. I closed my eyes and tears flowed without me being able to stop them. In front of me was my husband's empty grave, next to me a fisher boy with offering candies. And between those two seemingly unrelated things, a door that had been closed for 3 years had just swung wide open. I asked quickly, "Where is your town?" "On the other side of the Sound, following the coastal road. It takes more than an hour." "But ma'am," Leo hesitated. "What is it? Don't scare Uncle Seven. He is very afraid of people he doesn't know, especially people who wear black. Every time someone in black comes to ask questions, he hides." I looked at my dark mourning clothes. Suddenly, they felt as heavy as a tombstone on my chest. If that man was David, what kind of terror had he lived through for 3 years for a simple color to terrify him? I took off my dark coat and stuffed it into my purse. I took some cash out of my wallet and handed it to Leo. "Here, buy food for the kids. But please, don't tell anyone you are going to take me to see Uncle Seven. Not even your friends." Leo didn't take it right away. He looked at the money and looked at me. "My grandma says we shouldn't accept so much money from strangers, because then we'll be in debt." My chest hurt. A kid so poor he had to eat grave offerings, and yet he maintained so much dignity. Meanwhile, out there, men in suits in luxurious offices were delivering moral speeches, but with souls more rotten than a bottomless barrel. I put the money in his hand. "It's not a debt. I am giving it to you so you can buy rice and eggs for your grandma, in gratitude for telling me the truth." Leo grabbed it with both hands and muttered, "Yes, ma'am." I looked at the grave again. The box of fudge and the bourbon were still there. A few minutes ago, I was on my knees begging for forgiveness for having to marry someone else, and now I just wanted to smash the headstone to pieces. Not out of anger with him, but because if he was still alive, that grave had kept me buried in a lie for 3 years. I bent down to arrange the flowers. "David, if it is really you, I will take you home. Even if you don't remember me, even if you are afraid of me, even if the entire Hayes family stands in my way, I will not let them erase you ever again." I stood up and wiped my tears. "Take me there, Leo." The boy nodded and waved to his friends. "Go home! I'm going to take this lady to the village to see Uncle Seven. And don't say anything to anyone." The kids ran off with the candies, looking back as if they had seen an apparition in the cemetery. I followed Leo toward the exit, leaving David's empty grave behind in the mist and rain. In front of me opened an unknown, muddy dirt road that led to the peninsula. I didn't know if I was going to find a man who looked like my husband, or my husband himself, reduced to a version crushed by life to the point of forgetting his own name. But my intuition at that moment was stronger than ever. These past 3 years, I hadn't been crazy. I was the only one who refused to believe the lie the Hayes family wanted me to accept. Leo guided me down a small path behind the cemetery. It was damp and sticky dirt, marked with deep tire ruts. I, used to heels in boardrooms, had to roll up my pants, holding onto the rotting fences along the way. Leo walked fast, turning around every so often. Mrs. Sarah, step on the left. On the right, there's too much mud. I fell once and lost my shoe. My grandma laughed for 3 days. Despite my nerves, a small laugh escaped me. How strange life is. With my heart about to explode, a child's comment allowed me to take a breath. From the cemetery to the fishing village, we skirted a long road next to the marshlands with the murky water of the Sound on one side. The wind blew salty, bringing the smell of decaying seaweed, dried fish, and fresh mud. In the distance, low houses huddled together could be seen. Smoke from kitchens rose like silk threads. A few old boats rested on the shore. Faded nets full of patches hung on clotheslines in the wind. Leo chattered along the way. My town is very poor, ma'am. When the water is calm, there are fish. When there's a storm, we stay home mending nets. My grandma always says that even if you are poor, you shouldn't cheat anyone. That's why at the cemetery we only asked, we didn't steal. I looked at the boy's thin back with a tight heart. Some children are so poor they depend on offerings to eat, but they preserve their integrity. Almost an hour later, we reached the last house in the village. A low dwelling with an old corrugated metal roof. On the porch, small fish were drying in the sun. An old woman with white hair and a hunched back was cleaning vegetables. Seeing Leo, she lifted her head. "You're back. Why did you take so long?" Leo ran inside and spoke hurriedly. "Grandma, I brought this lady. She says the man in the photo at the cemetery is her husband, and that he looks just like our Uncle Seven." The old woman stopped chopping the vegetables. Her eyes, though clouded by age, cut like switchblades. She looked me up and down without inviting me in. "Who are you looking for?" I gave a deep bow of respect. "Hello, ma'am. My name is Sarah Miller. I am looking for my husband, David Hayes. He disappeared 3 years ago in the Red Horizon yacht fire. Leo told me there is a man here who looks like him." Granny Rose stayed silent. The wind moved the hanging fish, making them clatter against each other. A while later, she asked, "Are you sure you want to find him? Sometimes there are those who find what they are looking for and cannot bear it." That sentence made my heart skip a beat. I replied, "I will bear it. If he is truly my husband, no matter what he has become, I will accept him." Granny Rose looked at me for a moment and sighed. I am Granny Rose. 3 years ago, after a night of a massive storm, I went with some neighbors to the shore, and we found a man washed up in the reeds. He was purple, bleeding from the head, with half his back burned. "Did you take him to the hospital?" "Sure, we took him to the local clinic. They registered him as an unidentified male with severe head trauma, burns, and unstable mental status. But a few days later, 2 men showed up. They said they were from a charity association and wanted to take him to treat him for free." Granny Rose grimaced. "I may be poor, but I'm not blind. They dressed like benefactors, but they had the eyes of thugs. Besides, 7, upon hearing the voice of one of them, crawled under the bed shaking like a fish out of water. I saw things looked bad, so I told them he had died and we had buried him." I felt a chill down my spine. And they believed it? Not entirely, but in a fishing town, it's easy to get in and hard to get out if the people don't want you to. We are poor, but if someone messes with one of our wounded, we don't just stand by and watch. They snooped around for a few days and disappeared. Leo chimed in. "Uncle Seven is very good, ma'am. He knows how to mend nets. He makes kites for me. But he's very afraid of fire. If someone lights a big bonfire, he grabs his head." I asked with a voice I barely recognized as my own, "Where is Uncle Seven?" Granny Rose looked toward the back of the house. "He's mending nets on the back porch. But don't lunge at him. Strangers scare him, especially if they cry and yell his name. If you scare him, he will run off into the wetlands, and I won't be able to stop him." I nodded repeatedly. "I understand. I am just going to look at him. I won't scare him." The old woman led me through the small kitchen. There was a pot of fish stew boiling. The smell of onion and pepper was comforting. Through the back door, I saw a man sitting under the overhang, his head down, mending a torn green net. His shoulders were much bonier than before. His hair brushed the nape of his neck. His skin was tanned by the sun. His hands, once impeccable, were calloused from the friction of the ropes. But with just one glance, my heart stopped. Behind his left shoulder, under the old, somewhat loose shirt, peeked the long scar I used to put ointment on every night. On his wrist, the burnt watch, tied with a faded strip of cloth. I covered my mouth with my hand. Tears burst forth like a river. The man raised his head at that moment. His gaze met mine. There was no joy in his eyes. He didn't shout my name. There was only panic and absolute bewilderment. He backed away, dropping the knitting needle onto the dirty floor. Granny rose. "Who is this woman?" I froze. For 3 years I begged heaven that my husband was still alive. But no one taught me what to do when he actually was, and he looked at me like an intruder who had just mistakenly wandered into his life. I always imagined that if one day I reunited with David, I would run to hug him, crying rivers. I imagined he would say my name, take my hand and say, "Sarah, I'm home." But real life rarely accommodates like the movies. The man in front of me was indisputably my husband. The scar, the watch, the slight curvature of his ring finger because one day he got it caught in the door of a freezer. There was no doubt. And yet, his eyes were completely empty. He backed away and shrank behind Granny Rose. The net needle remained on the floor. He looked at me as if I were going to sink him back into the sea. "Who is this woman?" Hearing that phrase hurt so much, my face went numb. Leo stood next to me and said softly, "Uncle Seven, this lady says you look like her husband." David began to shake his head, breathing heavily. "No, I am not. I don't know her." I took a half step forward out of pure instinct. David. Upon hearing that name, he covered his ears. His body began to tremble, and his eyes grew bloodshot. "Don't call me that. Don't say that name." Granny Rose raised her hand to stop me. "Mrs. Sarah, don't pressure him. Names he doesn't know terrify him." Once I asked him where he was from, and his head hurt so much, he fainted on the porch. I stopped dead, dropping my arms, not daring to step any closer. Never in my life had I felt so useless. My husband was right there, just a few steps away, but the distance between us was deeper than the 3 years of his empty grave. I tried to swallow my cries. "Sorry, I won't scare you anymore." David looked at me with distrust. His gaze swept over my leather purse, my mud-stained shoes, and he backed up a little more. "Go away. I don't know you." That sentence was spoken softly, but it felt as if someone were cutting my skin with a dull knife. The man who had slept by my side, who made me herbal tea when my stomach hurt, who used to say with a laugh that if anyone messed with his wife, they'd have to deal with him. Now he was telling me he didn't know me. Granny Rose took me back to the kitchen and poured me a cup of herbal tea. "Don't take it to heart. Ever since he got here, he's been afraid of a lot of things. Fire, the smell of diesel, the sound of iron doors, men shouting. Once they burned trash nearby, and he hid under the cot hugging his watch, trembling. I sat on the threshold of the door, speaking with a thread of a voice. "Mrs. Sarah," Leo said in a whisper. "Sometimes Uncle Seven talks in his sleep and says, 'Don't push me into the water, I'm scared, and I don't dare call for help.'" I squeezed the hot cup in my hands, but my soul was frozen. "Have you ever asked him if he remembers anything?" Granny Rose shook her head. "Asking causes him pain. I am old and I don't have a medical degree, but I know that you cannot force memories out of a man with a head injury. He is like a tree that the storm uprooted. If you want it to live, you have to support it slowly. If you pull it by force, you break its roots." I looked down. An old woman from a fishing town understood this, and I, out of grief, almost lunged at him to demand he recognize me. At that moment, we heard the engine of a motorcycle stopping outside the house. The town dogs began to bark. Leo ran out, peeked through a crack, and returned pale. "Grandma, there's a stranger. He's not from town." Granny Rose stood up sharply. I pressed myself against the door. On the dirt road, a man in a dark jacket was questioning the dried fish vendor. He held his phone in his hand and kept glancing toward the old woman's house. His posture was not that of someone coming to buy, but of someone coming to watch. David, hearing the motorcycle from the porch, panicked. He grabbed his head and backed up until he hit the wooden wall. "They've come. They're back." I turned to him sharply. "Who has come?" He didn't answer. He was in a cold sweat, his lips trembling. Granny Rose helped him sit down. There. Don't ask any more, Mrs. Sarah. Maybe it's the same ones from last time." I immediately called my lawyer, Gabriel Mitchell. He answered quickly. "Gabriel, I found him." On the other end, there was total silence. I kept speaking, trying to maintain my composure, but he has lost his memory. He is in a town near the peninsula. Strangers have shown up. I need to get him out of here right now. But we can't make it public yet. Gabriel lowered his voice. Don't tell the Hayes family or anyone at the company. I'll contact Frank. Keep him there. We'll be right over. I hung up. I called Frank, who had worked with my father-in-law since North Star started. Hearing my name, he asked directly, Sarah, is something seriously wrong? Frank, I need a discreet car and a driver you trust completely to go out to the Olympic Peninsula. Don't tell anyone. He only replied, I'm on my way. Without asking a single question. Experienced people don't waste time on curiosity. While we waited for the car, Leo went to the backyard to find some shoes for David. When he returned, he picked up a piece of plastic dirty with mud near the fence. It must have fallen from the stranger when he was snooping around the back. Mrs. Sarah, whose is this? I took it. It was a broken parking token. The name could still be vaguely read. Pacific Blue Port. Michael Sterling's port. I wrapped the token in a tissue and hid it deep inside my purse. A first thread had just been exposed. For 3 years, I thought I was just looking for my husband. That night, I understood that someone else was also looking for him, but to make sure he never came back. When Frank's car arrived, it was already dark. David flat out refused to get in. He looked at the dark SUV parked in the alley and shot me a defensive look. No, I'm not going. They are going to catch me. I stood at a safe distance, lowering my voice. You don't have to trust me, but if you stay, the bad men are going to come. Granny Rose and Leo will go with you. I won't touch you, I promise. He looked at the old woman like a lost child. 7, listen to me. Let's get out of here. I'm going with you. Leo also grabbed his hand. Uncle 7, I'm going too. We won't leave you alone. Finally, he nodded almost imperceptibly. In the car, Granny Rose and Leo sat next to David in the back seats. I rode shotgun. I didn't turn around too much so as not to upset him. Through the rearview mirror, I saw how he clung to his charred watch, looking out the window into the darkness. I wanted to call him. I wanted to tell him I was there. I wanted to ask him how much he had suffered these 3 years, but I stayed silent. The car left the town under the dampness of the night. After a few miles, Frank looked in the rearview mirror and said in a grave tone, Sarah, a motorcycle is following us. I looked out the window. Small headlights swayed on the lonely road, getting closer and further away. I squeezed my purse, where the Pacific Blue token rested like a thorn. The car rolled for almost 40 minutes along the dark road bordering the marshlands. The headlights followed us for a stretch, until Frank suddenly turned down a hidden dirt road that cut through a field of tall grass. The tires crunched on the gravel. On both sides, there was only the sound of insects and the smell of stagnant water. Frank murmured, Don't worry, mister. Thomas used to use this road when he came fishing. Very few know it. I nodded, but I didn't let go of my purse. The Pacific Blue token was just a piece of plastic, but in that moment, it weighed like an unwritten confession. The cabin by the lake appeared behind the pine trees. It was a single-story house, with weathered siding, a moss-covered roof, and an old tree leaning over the water. Thomas Hayes had bought it as a weekend retreat. After his death, David almost never mentioned it, and the Hayes family seemed to have forgotten it. That's why it was the safest place now. Upon getting out of the car, David froze. He looked at the unfamiliar house and shot me a defensive look. Where are we? I stayed at a prudent distance. It's a place to rest for a while. Granny Rose and Leo are with you. No one is going to take you anywhere. He squeezed his watch in his hand. I don't know you. I heard the same phrase for the second time, and it hurt just as much, but I just nodded. I know. Think of me as just someone who helped your grandma bring you to a safe place. The old woman shot me a look of deep pity. She helped David go inside, speaking to him sweetly. 7. Let's go inside to wash your face and eat some soup. I'm here. No one is going to hurt you. Leo ran after him, turning around to tell me, Mrs. Sarah, don't be sad. Sometimes Uncle 7 also forgets where I leave my shoes. But he is very good. I smiled even though tears wanted to come out. A child's clumsy comfort warms more than 100 adult speeches. A while later, the lawyer Gabriel arrived. He wore a light jacket and his hair was still wet from the drizzle. Seeing David huddled in a corner of the house, he stopped dead, and his lips trembled. David jumped, grabbing his head. I quickly pulled Gabriel out to the porch. Don't call out to him suddenly. It terrifies him. Gabriel took a deep breath, his eyes reddening. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't imagine it was really him. I looked inside. David was sitting by a small fireplace. Granny Rose handed him a bowl of stew. He gripped the spoon very slowly, with a clumsiness that shrank the heart. Gabriel, if I announce now that he is alive, what will happen? Gabriel shook his head firmly. You can't. He is not lucid. He has no ID. He's been living under another name for 3 years. Ryan's faction could argue that you hired an imposter to cling to your position. In the worst-case scenario, they could erase all the evidence before we manage to act. So, I stay quiet. It's not about staying quiet, it's about speaking at the exact right moment. It was hard to hear, but he was right. In this life, sometimes to save your loved ones, you have to swallow your screams. If you make too much noise, the snake will hide in the grass. Almost an hour later, Dr. Claire Adams arrived. She was a trauma psychologist that Gabriel called in an emergency. She didn't wear a white coat, just a light gray sweater, and spoke very slowly. She sat at a distance from David, without staring at him. You can call me Claire. Today I'm not going to ask you who you are. I just want to know if your head hurts, if you sleep badly, or if something scares you. David looked at the old woman. Seeing her nod, he answered in a very low voice. I'm afraid of fire. Claire didn't pressure him. She just took notes and said softly, It's okay to feel fear. We don't have to stop being afraid today. I, from the doorway, heard such a simple sentence and felt my chest tighten. These 3 years I only wanted to bring my husband home. But now I understood that the first thing he needed wasn't to return, but peace. After examining him, the doctor spoke to me in private. He has symptoms of PTSD and dissociative amnesia. It is likely that his memories haven't completely disappeared, but the brain blocked them to protect itself. Don't force him to recognize you as his wife. Don't touch him if he doesn't give you permission. If you want to protect him, you first have to become a safe haven for him. I looked at my own hands, those hands that David had held tightly on our wedding day. Now, to be able to touch him, I had to ask permission from his own fears. That same night, Frank brought supplies: rice, eggs, canned goods, medicine, and clean blankets. Seeing David, he turned around to wipe away tears. Sarah, young David being alive is an immense blessing. I'm sure Mr. Thomas is protecting us from heaven. I told him in a low voice. Frank, I need you to review all the files from the Red Horizon fire. All the old copies, the technical data, the port logs, everything related to that night of June 18th. He nodded firmly. I still keep some keys to the old archives that Mr. Thomas ordered to be stored a long time ago. I'll see what I find. Night fell, and the cabin grew silent. The old woman and Leo slept in the small room. David slept in the back room with the door ajar. I sat on the porch, listening to the gentle lapping of the lake water hitting the wooden pilings. My phone suddenly lit up. It was a message from Ryan. Sarah, Michael has chosen the Grand Emerald Hotel. In a week, we will have the ceremony in style. Remember, you have your dress fitting tomorrow. Shortly after, a message arrived from Michael Sterling. In a week, you will no longer have to carry everything alone. I read the 2 messages and then looked toward the room where my husband slept under the name of Uncle Seven. I replied to Ryan, I'll go. But before the ceremony, I want both parties to open their financial, operational, insurance, and port data files for an audit regarding the merger. A wedding is for life, and a merger is the future of the company. Everything must be transparent. 10 minutes later, Ryan answered, Agreed. How cautious you are. Sounds good to me. I'll arrange it. I put down the phone. In the eyes of the public, I was the defeated woman about to dress up to get engaged to my husband's rival. But in this hidden cabin, my husband was still alive. And from the moment Ryan agreed to open the files, the steel trap they had set for me began to crack. I looked at the blackness of the lake and murmured, David, this time I won't let them bury you again. The next morning, I returned to North Star Shipping, keeping the most serene expression possible. No one knew I hadn't even slept 2 hours, nor did they know that in a cabin facing the lake, David was still alive, startling at every creak of the wood. I got into the elevator and looked at myself in the metallic mirror. I looked strange. My eyes were puffy and my lips pale, but my back had to remain straight. Being a daughter-in-law in that family was already difficult, but being the wife of a man the world had declared dead was even more so. And being a wife who, having found her husband, had to pretend to prepare to marry someone else, fate is sometimes a relentless screenwriter. As soon as I reached the 17th floor, I saw the PR department running back and forth. On the large screen in the lobby, financial portals showed new articles. North Star CEO opens up to love again after family tragedy. Pacific Blue and North Star, heading for historic merger. I read those lines and let out a bitter smile. They said I was opening my heart, but in reality, I was preparing to open the dust-filled drawers from 3 years ago. Ryan walked out of the boardroom radiant, as if he had just won the lottery. Sarah, you're here. Michael's people sent the list of documents to review. I've asked the lawyers to prepare everything. I nodded. I want them to add the complete insurance file of the Red Horizon yacht. The shift logs from that night, the departure authorizations, the fuel log, the maintenance reports for the fire alarms, and the security tapes from the old vault. Ryan's smile froze. Why are you going to dig up something so painful? That case is closed. I looked at him with a monotone expression. Since Pacific Blue wants a strategic merger, we have to review all past risks. You wouldn't want the shareholders to say tomorrow that we hid debts, litigation, or problems with the insurance, right? Ryan was silent for a second and then smiled again. You're so meticulous. Agreed. I'll tell them to open the old archive. He turned around, and as he walked away, I noticed how he quickly clenched his fist and then released it. Someone who isn't afraid of a file doesn't react like that. Around noon, Michael arrived with his team of assistants. He brought a large cream-colored box that he placed in front of me. I chose an engagement dress for you. I hope you like it. I opened the box. Inside was an ivory silk dress with a boat neck, long sleeves, and small hand-embroidered pearls. It was beautiful, so beautiful that any woman in love would melt seeing it. But to me, it was like a fishing net wrapped in gift paper, waiting to trap me in silence. I closed the box. Thank you, Michael. I will try it on later. He tilted his head a little. Still so distant. In a week we will be family, I replied. In a week it will be in a week. Today we are still in the boardroom of North Star. Michael smiled, but his eyes remained cold. I like how strict you are. Only a woman like that can maintain an empire. I looked at him directly. I hope you are just as strict with your paperwork. The atmosphere turned freezing. Ryan hurried to intervene. Come on, it's a happy day. Don't get defensive, Sarah. Michael understands. He always does everything to the millimeter. David was like that too. Hearing my husband's name from his mouth, my stomach churned. The man who hurt him, or at least knew about it, pronounced his name with a tone of family affection. There are people with skin so thick that not even the rain manages to get them wet. In the afternoon, Gabriel Mitchell arrived as a consultant for the audit. He wore a gray suit, briefcase in hand, and the calm of someone who knows nothing. As soon as he entered my office, he lowered his voice. Sarah, I reviewed the prenup. That clause about the proxy voting rights is extremely dangerous. By signing it, Pacific Blue will practically control North Star. I held up my copy and laughed dryly. So, they want to tie me to the company using a wedding ring. If you object after the wedding, they will say you signed it of your own free will. I laughed again. Free will while they drown you. It sounds highly legal. Gabriel placed another stack of papers on the desk. Frank let me know that he remembered something. Your father-in-law ordered backup copies of the Red Horizon cameras to be stored in the port's warehouse. Not many people know they exist. I stood up instantly. To open the warehouse, you need company authorization, right? That's right, and a valid reason. I looked at the audit list in front of me. Then we will use the excuse of the merger. I will sign the order to open the old archive under the pretext of verifying pre-merger risks. Gabriel looked at me. Be careful. Ryan must suspect something by now. I know. But if we delay, he'll manage to hide the evidence. At dusk, Eleanor called me. I put her on speakerphone while I signed documents. Sarah, I heard you want to open the fire file. You are going to start a new life. Why dig up the past and the pain? I answered Eleanor. Precisely because I'm going to start a new chapter. Everything must be clean. I don't want them to say I brought a company full of dark debts into my new marriage. She went quiet. Women shouldn't ask so many questions. If someone saves you, show gratitude. People will say you are ungrateful, someone who doesn't know how to receive her good luck. I looked at David's photo on the table. The luck that comes my way. Let me decide it, ma'am. I hung up on her before she could say more. For the first time in 3 years, I felt no guilt about hanging up on my mother-in-law. Around 6:00 p.m., Ryan brought me a very thin folder. Sarah, this is what maintenance found. The Red Horizon thing happened a long time ago. A lot of things got damaged by the heat. I'm sure there's nothing important. I flipped through a couple of pages. Key documents were missing. I looked up. Ryan, I need the originals. Not something that's already been filtered. His smile faded slightly. You don't trust me. I set down my pen. Company affairs don't run on trust, but on paper and ink. He stayed silent for a few seconds and nodded. Agreed. I'll have them open the old archive warehouse. When he left, I texted Frank. The warehouse will be open tonight. Get ready. He replied with 3 words. Standing by. I sat alone in my office. Outside, the city was already lit up. On the sofa lay the box with Michael's dress. On the table, the prenup. In my hand, the newly signed authorization to open the warehouse. That wedding dress was supposed to be my sentence, but they never imagined that the same day I pretended to accept it, the first door to the truth they hid from me for 3 years was beginning to open. That night, I left the office when almost the entire building was dark. My heels clicked dryly in the marble hallways. In my hand, I carried the order to open the old archive. That paper was light, but to get it, I had to feign docility in the face of a matrimonial trap. Frank was waiting for me in the underground parking garage. He wore his old jacket, still with that motor oil smell so characteristic of the docks. Sarah, I already let Paul know. The security guard for the old archive. He's one of Mr. Thomas's loyal men, totally trustworthy. I nodded. Let's go, Frank. The night is long, but those who want to cover their tracks surely aren't sleeping. The old archive was in the technical zone near Pier 3, where empty shipping containers formed dark alleyways. The night wind whistled through the mooring cables. The room was the size of a small kitchen. The walls were yellowing. On one side, there were metal filing cabinets. On the other, dusty boxes of old tapes. Paul, the guard, received us with the blinds half closed. Mrs. Miller, Frank, I can only open it for 2 hours. Tomorrow morning, the maintenance guys will notice someone came in. Frank patted him on the shoulder. 2 hours is enough. Just make sure nobody is snooping around. Gabriel, the lawyer, was there too. He brought evidence bags and a small video camera to record how we extracted the documents. He didn't say much, just reminded us that everything we took had to be clearly recorded. If it was handed over to the police, it had to be clear where the evidence and the video came from. I stood behind Frank, watching Paul open each old filing cabinet. The sound of the key turning in the lock sounded like dry metal. Shortly after, he pulled out several boxes of security tapes, logbooks, fire alarm schedules, departure manifests, and a sealed folder with the logo of the yacht Times Red Horizon, year 2021. Just seeing Times Red Horizon 2021 times made my eyes sting. Paul inserted one of the tapes into a portable player. The old screen showed a grainy image of the yacht's lower hallway. The night of June 18th began to unfold before me again through those blurry frames. At 8:31 p.m., a waiter walked by. At 8:48 p.m., David appeared at the end of the hall, holding a glass of water, walking unsteadily. I held my breath. Pause. Paul stopped the image. It wasn't crystal clear, but I recognized his silhouette, leaning to one side, with his left hand over his stomach, just like when his gastritis flared up. Behind him walked a man in a waiter's uniform with his head down. Gabriel noted the time in his notebook. At 9:02 p.m., the screen suddenly went black. Frank asked Paul to check other cameras, the hallway, the engine room, the access to the lower deck. All of them turned off in the same interval. Paul said with a trembling voice, "This wasn't because of the fire, ma'am. The fire started almost an hour later. This kind of blackout means someone cut the feed on purpose." Gabriel asked, "For how long?" Frank checked the printed log and answered with a heavy voice, 47 minutes. I felt a shiver down my spine. 47 minutes is nothing in a whole lifetime, but it was enough to take a man to the lower level, turn off the alarms, get a body off the ship, and turn my husband into a dead man in the eyes of the world. Paul checked the fire alarm log. On the yellowed paper, it clearly read that the aft zone alarm had been manually deactivated at 8:59 p.m., right before the fire started. I asked, "Who has authorization to turn it off?" Paul looked at the internal codebook and turned pale. This special code is only given to the chief engineer or very high-level people. Here it says the one who used it was Ray Davis, the technical assistant, who is very close to Ryan. After the fire, this guy quit, and rumor has it he moved down south. Gabriel took photos of all the documents instantly. I gripped the edge of the table, digging my nails in until it hurt, but I didn't let go. Frank opened the port departure manifests. At 16 p.m., a small auxiliary skiff left the area where the yacht was anchored. But in the official reports of the accident, that skiff was never mentioned. In the blurry video from a distant angle, you could see two figures aboard the skiff and a long bundle covered by a tarp in the center. I looked at that bundle under the tarp and felt as if ice water had been poured onto my chest. What was that? No one answered. Because deep down, we all knew that under that tarp was probably David. Gabriel placed all the papers, copies of the tapes, and logs into the sealed bags. He pronounced every word clearly. As of right now, these are no longer the hunches of a wife. They are criminal evidence. I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. There are truths that, when they are so close, empty you completely instead of making you cry. Close to midnight, I took the copies of the videos and papers to the cabin by the lake. Dr. Claire was already there. I didn't want David to see the images yet. But Claire told me that if we played very brief snippets, without violent scenes, we could try always stopping at the slightest sign of panic. David was sitting in a wooden chair on the porch. Hearing me arrive, he looked up and then looked down again to keep observing the charred watch in his hand. He still didn't call me by my name, but he no longer avoided me. Just like the first day, I placed the portable screen at a distance. Can you watch this for a bit? If your head hurts, I'll turn it off immediately. He looked at Granny Rose. She nodded, and he slowly turned his eyes toward the recording. It showed David walking down the hallway. He frowned, gripping the armrests of the chair. When the skiff and the covered bundle appeared on the screen, his lips began to tremble. Oil. Claire spoke to him calmly. What does it smell like? What do you remember? His breathing accelerated. Diesel. Very dark. I stood behind the doctor without moving. David grabbed his head and his voice broke. No. Don't throw me, Ryan. I felt as if a dagger was driven into my chest. Claire turned off the screen immediately and approached, but without touching him. Stop right there. You are in a safe place. With Granny Rose, with Leo. There is no fire. David hunched over himself. Sweat dripped onto the floorboards. Granny Rose put a clean towel over his hand. 7. Breathe, son. I turned my face away. And then, finally, I started to cry. Not out of weakness, but because Ryan's name had just come from my own husband's lips. It was no longer just a suspicion of mine. That night, when David finally fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion, I stayed on the porch looking at the dark waters of the lake. On my phone, Ryan had texted me. Sarah, remember the dress fitting tomorrow? Michael is very excited. I read it. I turned off the screen. Tomorrow I would go try on the dress. Tomorrow I would smile and let them think the net was closing around me. But those 47 missing minutes had returned. And this time, they would drag every single person who buried my husband alive out into the light. The morning of the 5th day, I didn't go to the company. I said I was going to try on the dress and check on the event preparations. Ryan sent me a sickly sweet message. You get some rest. I'll take care of things at the office. I read it and felt disgusted. To kick someone out of command, sometimes you don't have to shout. You just kindly pull their chair away and tell them to rest. Gabriel picked me up in a silver sedan, not the usual company car. He handed me a baseball cap and a mask. Sarah, today we are going to see 2 people. Old Pete, the mechanic who checked the secondary systems of the Red Horizon, and Laura, the waitress from the main lounge that night. I asked, are they still in Seattle? Pete is, but he quit the trade. Lives in Ballard. Laura moved to Tacoma and opened a small diner. Both received money after the fire. I looked out the window. The morning streets were full of traffic, but in my chest, there was only a freezing emptiness. From who? Gabriel answered quietly. Through Ray Davis, Ryan's buddy. Old Pete's house was at the end of an alley with moisture-covered walls. Work clothes stained with oil hung by the door. Pete, about 60 years old, gray-haired and somewhat hunched, refused to speak as soon as Gabriel handed him his card. I don't know anything. I already talked to the cops. It was an accident. Don't come back. I pulled down my mask. Pete, I am David Hayes' wife. He froze, looked at me with bloodshot eyes, and immediately looked away. I offer my condolences. But there's no point in stirring up the dead. It only brings pain. I showed him the screen of my phone with the photo of David sitting in the cabin. A profile picture, thinner, with grown-out hair, but where the scar and the burnt watch were perfectly visible. Pete looked at it and started to shake. The glass of water on the table fell to the floor with a sharp crack. Mr. David, Is still alive? I looked at him without blinking. Alive, but without his memory, terrified of fire and the voices of strangers. During these 3 years, you have been able to sleep in peace. The man slumped into a chair, covering his face with hands weathered by grease and engines. A tough man crying like a child. I thought they were just smuggling goods. I swear to you I didn't know they were going to kill someone. Gabriel turned on a recorder and placed it on the table, maintaining his calm. Tell us everything from the beginning. Only the truth. Pete confessed that before that night, Ray Davis gave him $20,000 in exchange for slightly shifting the angle of the hallway camera and turning off the aft zone alarm for a few minutes. Ray told him they were going to move some sensitive cargo and didn't want any record of it. Pete was poor. His wife needed dialysis. He had debts. The money was too much, and his conscience gave way. I finished my shift and got off the boat before 9 p.m. When I heard about the fire the next morning, I almost died of fright. Ray told me that if I opened my mouth, my family would pay the consequences. Later, he gave me a little more money and forced me to declare that there was a thermal failure in the sensors. I asked, "Do you have any proof?" He stood up shakily, moved a loose floorboard under his bed, and pulled out an old flip phone wrapped in plastic. I didn't dare use it or throw it away. There are several text messages from Ray here. I kept it just in case. I knew I did wrong, but I was also afraid that one day they might try to silence me. Gabriel placed the phone in an evidence bag using a handkerchief. Leaving Pete's house, I didn't say a single word. There are truths that, upon hearing them, don't relieve the weight, but rather give shape to the wound. That same afternoon, we went to find the small diner in Tacoma. Laura, the waitress, recognized me instantly. She was serving some drinks. The tray trembled in her hands, and she turned pale. "I'm not seeing anyone. Leave." I approached her and lowered my voice. "Laura, my husband is still alive." She dropped the spoon into the coffee maker, splashing everything, but didn't even flinch at the hot water. Gabriel showed her David's photo. Laura burst into tears and dragged us into the back room. "It's my fault. Forgive me. I failed Mr. David and you." I sat across from her. "Tell me, what did you see that night?" Laura wiped her tears with her apron. "That night, I was serving the guests in the lounge. A maintenance guy gave me a glass of water to take to Mr. David because he said his stomach hurt. I didn't suspect anything. I just did my job. A while after he drank it, he got very pale, holding onto the wall, and could barely walk." Her words choked up, twisting her hands. "I saw 2 people take him downstairs. One was a waiter, the other was dressed in dark clothes and stayed behind. I didn't dare look too much. I asked, 'Did you see Ryan?' Laura bit her lip. I didn't see Ryan's face clearly, but I recognized his voice. He said, 'Take him down first. Don't let anyone see him.' I won't forget that voice. My chest tightened with pain. And then what? After the fire, they came looking for me. They gave me $10,000 and told me to move out of Seattle and never come back. They knew my brother is a deep-sea fisherman. They threatened me, said if I talked too much, my brother might have an accident at sea." She covered her face, crying. "I was a coward. I took the money. I told myself that since he was already dead, I wouldn't save anyone by opening my mouth. But these 3 years, every night I dream about that hallway. I dream about Mr. David leaning against the wall, pale, while I did nothing. I closed my eyes. $10,000 to buy silence, $20,000 to twist a camera, and 3 years of a man's life thrown into the mud like an anonymous garbage bag." Gabriel wrote up a statement right there. He told Laura, just as he had told Pete, "From today on, you cannot be alone. The firm will put you in a safe house and process witness protection. If you want to redeem yourself, you have to be alive to speak at the trial." Laura nodded as her tears fell onto her apron. Walking out to the car, I saw a dark sedan parked across the street. The window rolled down for a second and rolled back up. Gabriel saw it too. He didn't say anything, just opened the car door for me. We pulled away, and at that instant, my phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. "Sarah, which store did you go to try on the dress? Michael told me they didn't see you at the boutique." I looked at that line of text that froze my blood. He had already caught the scent. I replied, "I went to see a private seamstress. Tomorrow I will stop by the hotel to see the ballroom." 3 minutes later, a message arrived from an unknown number. "The dead should rest in peace. The living shouldn't dig graves." I stared at the screen for a long time and showed it to Gabriel. He just said, "They are scared." I looked up at the road. For the first time in 3 years, the fear wasn't just in my heart. It was crawling toward those who thought they had buried it all under the ashes. The sixth day, I woke up when the lake was still covered by a layer of fog. The old cabin was unusually quiet. The distant crow of a rooster, the slight lapping of water against the posts, and the crackle of the fire Granny Rose was lighting in the kitchen. Everything was very subdued, as if they feared any sudden noise would scare David. Since he arrived here, he hadn't slept peacefully. Sometimes he woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, clinging to the charred watch. Other times he would just stare out the window at the dark waters, as if trying to rescue some memory washed away by the waves. Granny Rose would sit next to him and calm him down. "7, there's no fire, son. Grandma is here. Leo is here." Every time I heard that, I stayed outside the room, biting my lip until it bled. My husband was right there, and I couldn't hug him, or shake him, or say, "I'm here," to quench the longing of 3 years. Dr. Claire had been very strict. A mind that has lived in terror for so long is like a bird with a broken wing. If you want it to fly again, you first have to let it trust your hand again. That morning, the doctor arrived early. She didn't wear a white coat, just a light gray sweater and her hair tied back. In her hand, she brought a cloth bag. Inside, a piece of rope smelling of the sea, a scrap of dark cloth, a small speaker that played the gentle sound of waves, and David's watch. She placed each item on the wooden table, but without moving them too close to him. "Today we are not going to try to remember everything," she said slowly. "We'll just look a little, listen a little. If you feel bad, we stop immediately." David was sitting in the chair by the window. Granny Rose was knitting next to him. Leo was sitting on the threshold looking at his Uncle 7 without blinking. I stayed near the door, at a distance that wouldn't make him feel cornered. He looked at the objects, and his eyes settled on the watch. A long time later, he reached out and touched the broken glass. I felt a knot in my throat. I bought him that watch for his 36th birthday. That day, he put it on and showed it to me, laughing like a kid. "If my wife gives it to me, I'll wear it until it breaks." And it truly broke on a night of fire, along with the peace of our entire lives. "Doctor." Claire turned on the sound of the waves, a murmur that filled the room. David frowned and gripped the watch tighter. "What do you see?" the doctor asked. He shook his head. "Darkness. In that darkness, is there any smell?" His lips trembled. "Diesel, smoke, and a glass of water that tasted bitter." I gripped the doorframe with all my muscles tense, without making a sound. Claire didn't push. She brought the piece of rope closer, and then the dark cloth for him to see. "Do you remember where you were?" David began to breathe heavily. "The hallway, under the boat. It was hard to walk." Someone said, "David, rest a bit." He grimaced, putting his hand to his stomach. It hurt a lot. My head was spinning. My legs wouldn't respond. Granny Rose stopped knitting. Leo held his breath. The doctor moved the dark cloth a little closer. As soon as David's eyes fell on it, his face lost its color. "They put a cloth over me." His voice sounded hoarse. I couldn't see anything. Someone was pulling my feet. The floor was freezing. My shoulder hurt. I heard an iron door close. I felt my heart shatter to pieces. I imagined my husband being dragged down the cold hallway, covered as if he were cargo, pushed out of his life while he was still breathing. David suddenly gritted his teeth. "Ryan." That name dropped into the room like a stone in calm water. Granny Rose looked up sharply. Leo's eyes widened, and I stood paralyzed, digging my nails into my hands. "Doctor," Claire asked very softly, "what did you hear Ryan say?" David trembled, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Don't blame me, brother." He swallowed hard, as if every word tore at his throat. "If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being in the wrong place." I closed my eyes. Ryan, the half-brother who had bowed his head before my father-in-law's portrait, the one who called me sister-in-law, the one who said he only wanted to save the company. In my husband's broken memories, he wasn't a spectator. He was there that night. The doctor wanted to stop, but David kept muttering, "There was someone else." "Who?" He shook his head, his eyes bloodshot. I didn't see his face. The voice was different. He said, "Let's do this fast, before the wind changes direction." A shiver ran entirely through me. Before the wind changes direction, I had heard Michael Sterling use that exact phrase in an old negotiation. He said it slowly, with confidence, like someone used to calculating a ship's course. Now that phrase directly connected the burning yacht to Pacific Blue Port. David started gasping. The doctor instantly turned off the wave sounds and moved the cloth and rope away. "We stop here. You are in the cabin. There is no fire. No one is pulling you. Do you hear me? David hunched over, grabbing his head with his hands. Granny Rose dropped the net and spoke with a trembling voice. 7. Breathe, son. Breathe like I taught you. Take air in and let it out. No one is going to take you. I took a step forward and stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to run and hug him, tell him I believed him, that I had heard everything, that I would make them pay, but I had to stay still. Staying still was the hardest way to love him in my entire life. A while later, David looked up. He looked around the room until he stopped at me. I didn't dare call out to him too loudly. I just said, David. He looked at me for a long time. In his eyes, there was still mist, there was still pain, but no longer the terrified distance of the first day in the village. Then he called me in a whisper, Sarah. With that single word, I felt my legs give way. In 3 years, how many people had called me? Eleanor to reproach me, Ryan to manipulate me, the shareholders to question me, the press to dig for dirt. But no name hurt me and revived me as much as hearing it from his mouth. I nodded as tears fell. Yes, I'm here. Leaning on the arms of the chair, David walked slowly toward me. The doctor didn't stop him. At an arm's length, he stopped, as if he still feared his memories were deceiving him. I remember you were crying. I started to cry and laugh at the same time. You cried a lot, so much I thought you ran out of tears. He raised his hand. I didn't dare move. After a few seconds, he himself placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a very light touch, as if he feared I would disappear, but to me, it weighed as much as those 3 years of waiting. I, standing by the door, covered my eyes with my hands. Granny Rose looked away, grumbling affectionately. The sea wind coming into the house really stings the eyes. No one said anything else. When David calmed down, Dr. Claire reminded us of something very important. What he had remembered today was vital, but only what he was absolutely certain of could be used. A wounded mind is like a cut on the skin. Digging too much only makes it bleed again. Gabriel listened to the recording and nodded. Sarah, tomorrow is the engagement party. There will be shareholders, press, the bank, Eleanor, Ryan, and Michael. If we expose it there, they will have no escape. David turned to me. In his gaze, there was already lucidity, pain, and a guilt that he didn't yet know how to name. Are you still going to stand next to that man? I looked him in the eyes. Only for the last time. And I won't be there to be his bride. I'll be there to dig you out of the grave they dug for you. He stayed quiet, and then slowly nodded. By late afternoon, I returned to the Grand Emerald Hotel to get ready. I did not put on the ivory silk dress that Michael had sent me. I chose an elegant dress, but in a very dark blue tone, almost black. It wasn't dazzling, but it was sober and cold enough to walk onto the stage with a straight back. In the dressing room, looking in the mirror, I saw the old jacket David wore in the village hanging on the chair behind me. The faded fabric still smelled of saltpeter, the sea, and the days he survived without knowing who he was. On one side was the outfit I was going to wear for the farce. On the other, the jacket of the man who had returned from the dead. I looked at both things in the mirror, wiped a tear, and told myself that tomorrow I was not going to be anyone's bride. I was going to bring my husband back home, using the exact same stage they had set up to steal his legacy. Sunday, the 18th of June, 2024. The ballroom of the Grand Emerald Hotel was adorned with white flowers. From the entrance, a screen illuminated in golden letters against a crimson background. Celebration of the engagement and announcement of the strategic merger between North Star Shipping and Pacific Blueport. The spotlights highlighted huge vases with orchids. Everything was as luxurious as it was freezing, exactly like a loveless wedding, just a contract wrapped in lace. I waited in the anteroom, listening to the chatter of the guests, the clinking of glasses, the flashes of cameras. Almost all the major shareholders of North Star had attended, as well as bank representatives and business journalists. Everyone was anxious for the news of the merger. Ryan entered the room and looked me up and down. He frowned seeing me in the dark dress instead of the bridal one. Sarah, why didn't you put on what Michael bought you? I buttoned my cuffs securely. I'm wearing what I consider appropriate. He forced a smile. Today is a happy day. Don't make people uncomfortable. Michael prepared everything with a lot of care. I looked at him through the mirror. It's better to make people uncomfortable for a moment than to live a mistake your whole life, Ryan. His smile faltered. He wanted to ask something, but right then Eleanor walked in. She wore a purple velvet suit and a pearl necklace, impeccably made up. Seeing me, she flashed her best maternal smile for the photographers. My dear, you look beautiful today. You've finally decided to think about the future. I turned to her. For 3 years, I had treated her like my mother-in-law. For 3 years, I wanted to believe that, even if she was the stepmother, she loved David in her own way. But now, seeing her smile, I only felt profound exhaustion. Today I will think seriously about the future. She didn't catch my tone. She stepped closer and squeezed my hand, as if warning me. When we go out there, remember to speak softly. Don't embarrass us. The entire press and the banks are watching us. I pulled my hand away. The Hayes family lost its dignity the day they used the life of one of their sons as a bargaining chip. She turned pale. What are you saying? Before I could answer, the presenter's voice echoed in the main ballroom. Eleanor shot me one last look with no trace of sweetness and walked out ahead of me. Michael Sterling was standing in the center of the stage in an impeccable black suit and burgundy tie, showing the poise of someone who knows he's won. On the adjacent table rested the merger contract, the rings, and a bouquet of flowers. Seeing me, he held out his hand. Sarah, today you no longer have to carry everything alone. I looked at his hand and walked straight to the podium without taking it. Ryan quickly grabbed the microphone and smiled at the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, after many hardships, my sister-in-law has finally chosen the best path for North Star. If my brother David were here watching us from heaven, he would surely rest in peace. Lukewarm applause was heard in the room. Hearing from heaven left a bitter taste in my throat, calling a living man a ghost, and in the same act, using his name to steal his company. The presenter handed the floor over to me. I took the microphone, and silence fell over the room. I scanned the faces present. Eleanor in the front row with a silk handkerchief. Ryan next to Michael, eyes gleaming in anticipation of my submission. Michael maintaining his smile, awaiting my words of gratitude. I spoke, enunciating every syllable. Thank you all for coming. But first and foremost, I want to clarify something. Today, there will be no engagement. A murmur of shock filled the room. Ryan took long strides toward me. Sarah, what are you saying? You're very nervous. You misspoke, right? I didn't look at him. I haven't misspoken, and I'm not so tired that I don't know where I stand. Michael Sterling took a step forward, struggling to keep his affable tone. Sarah, there are a lot of people here. If something is wrong, let's talk in private. Don't let emotions ruin this important moment. I turned to him. No, Michael. Burying the dead while they are still alive is not something that should be discussed in private. That sentence paralyzed the entire room for several seconds. I continued speaking into the microphone. If David Hayes really died 3 years ago, why has someone not stopped sabotaging North Star ever since? Why was the $40 million credit line blocked exactly at this moment? Why was an $8 million contract transferred to Pacific Blue? And why, in the prenuptial agreement, did Mr. Michael add a clause to strip me of all my proxy voting rights for 5 years? The uproar exploded like a crashing wave. I pressed the button on the remote, and the huge screen behind me lit up. First, the blurry video of the old camera from the Red Horizon. The lower deck hallway in the dark. David appeared on the image with his glass of water, walking clumsily. Then, right at 9:02 p.m., everything went black. This is the backup copy that was still kept in the port's warehouses. An hour before the yacht caught fire, the cameras from different angles were cut simultaneously for 47 minutes. And it wasn't because of the fire, because the fire hadn't started yet. I pressed the button again. The fire alarm log appeared. The letters were worn, but still legible. This is the emergency log. The aft alarm was manually turned off at 8:59 p.m., right before the fire. The access code used belonged to Ray Davis, technical assistant, and Ryan Hayes' trusted right-hand man, Ryan shouted. Fake! Those are forged documents. I looked at him. If they are fake, you just have to wait for the police to verify them. Why are you screaming? His face was livid. I clicked again. On the screen came the port departure manifest and the small blurry snippet in a corner. This is the log of an auxiliary skiff that set sail at 9:16 p.m. But in the official report, it never appeared. In that skiff were 2 people and a long bundle covered with a tarp. And that bundle was most likely my husband. The entire ballroom erupted in whispers. Some stood up. Journalists raised their cameras en masse. The bankers looked at each other with very serious faces. I didn't stop. Bank documents appeared on the screen. And here we have receipts of payments for $2.8 million that went through a shell company linked to Michael Sterling's inner circle. Here is the statement of old Pete, who took $20,000 to tamper with the cameras and silence the alarms during that interval. Here is the statement of Laura, the waitress who saw David being given a glass with a strange substance before they took him to the lower deck. Eleanor brought her hands to her chest and collapsed into her seat. My God, Sarah is sick. Someone get her off the stage. She has gone crazy. I looked at her, and the pain hardened my voice. Don't be in such a rush to cry, ma'am. You still have things left to hear. Michael Sterling turned to the tech crew, gesturing for them to cut the screen. But Gabriel Mitchell, the lawyer, was already next to the control panel flanked by 2 hotel security guards. He lifted the evidence file and spoke firmly into the second microphone. All the material, logs, tapes, and testimonies have already been certified and handed over to the competent authorities. No one has the right to destroy them. Ryan ran to the edge of the stage, pointing his finger at me. Sister-in-law, just because you don't want to get married, you've invented all this to destroy me. I am David's brother. I am family. I am a Hayes. I answered him through the microphone. If you are his brother, then tell me, why does David, upon hearing your name, become terrified and grab his head? Why, when he panicked, was the first name that came to his mind yours? Ryan froze. At that exact moment, the side door of the ballroom opened, and David walked in. He wore a simple white button-down shirt with the grayish jacket over it. Dr. Claire walked by his side. Gabriel gestured to the attendees to keep their distance. His face was very thin, and the exhaustion was still noticeable in his eyes. But it was him, David, the man the entire room believed had been under the earth for 3 years. Someone dropped a crystal glass, which shattered against the floor. There were gasps of, "Good Lord, it's David." Eleanor stood up abruptly, her lips trembling uncontrollably. David. Ryan took a step back, pale as if all the blood had been sucked out of him. Michael Sterling lost his eternal smile, and the knuckles of his hand, which still held the ring box, turned white. David swept his gaze over everyone in the room and finally locked his eyes on Ryan. He stayed quiet for a long time, as if he needed to gather all his strength from those shattered memories. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, but every word fell into the room with absolute clarity. You didn't want to save North Star. You wanted to bury me for the second time. A total silence invaded the room, as if all the outside noises had been muted. David was still standing there, thinner, paler, but the same determination from the past was shining in his eyes again. He didn't walk forward very fast. Doctor, Claire whispered to him to only say what he was 100% sure of. David nodded and looked directly at Ryan. That night, I drank the water one of your men gave me. Then I got dizzy, and my stomach hurt so much I couldn't stand up. I remember the smell of diesel. I remember the tarp they put over my face. I remember how they dragged me down the cold hallway. And I remember the phrase you whispered in my ear. David paused, breathing heavily. Don't blame me, brother. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being in the wrong place. Ryan shook his head desperately. No, it's not true. They've brainwashed you. You're confused. I'm sure she made you believe that. Gabriel stepped forward. David's memory is not our only evidence. He placed his hand on the documents. We have the camera tapes cut for 47 minutes. The alarms deactivated before the fire. The hidden reports of the skiff leaving. We have the testimonies of the mechanic and the waitress who saw you take him. And finally, the money that Pacific Blue sent them through intermediaries. The room was boiling. Some covered their mouths, others exchanged stunned glances. The same shareholders who 10 minutes ago were applauding the engagement were now pale. 2 men in dark suits entered from the side. One of them flashed a police badge. Mr. Ryan Hayes, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, and Mr. Michael Sterling. We ask that you come with us to provide statements regarding these events. Please, everyone remain calm. Michael turned pale, but tried to maintain his untouchable corporate demeanor. Officers, you cannot smear my company's name based on uncorroborated documents. Gabriel replied, we do not issue the verdict. But the evidence is documented, and justice will do its job. Ryan suddenly let out a dry, unhinged laugh, very far removed from his face of a good brother. Sure you do, sister-in-law. I just wanted to help you, right? Bullshit. You're all on her side. My father always treated David as his only son. And what about me? I also carry the Hayes name, but I had to stand by and watch him take the whole shipping line. So I told him. So you tried to murder your own brother because you felt marginalized, I said. Ryan turned to me with bloodshot eyes. And what do you know? You're just a daughter-in-law. You think you're superior? A woman who's been in the family for a couple of years sitting in the chairman's chair. While I, who carry Hayes' blood, had to bow my head and call you sister-in-law. Eleanor screamed, "Shut up, Ryan!" But it was too late. When greed blows up in the air, there is no silk handkerchief that can cover it. I pulled a yellowed, very old envelope from the file. This is a letter that my father-in-law, Thomas Hayes, left for his lawyer before he died. In it, he wrote that he had thought about giving you a chance on the board, but then he discovered that you were selling information about our ship's routes to the competition. That is why he stripped you of all decision-making power. Eleanor fell back into her chair without a drop of color in her face. I looked at her, and for the first time, I called her by her real name. Eleanor, you knew this. You knew that Thomas didn't sideline his son for no reason. But during these 3 years, you used the family altar, the tears, and the word family to force me to yield the position to Ryan. You didn't start the fire, but you covered the ashes to protect the one who truly deserved to pay. She sobbed. I was just afraid of losing another son, I replied in a low voice. And that is why you chose to let my husband lose everything again. The sentence silenced her. Michael Sterling was escorted toward the exit to testify about the financial conspiracy, the diversion of clients, and the attempt to take over our board of directors through the rigged marriage. Ryan was also taken away. As he passed by me, he shot me a look of pure hatred, but was unable to articulate a word. Eleanor had to be carried out supported by her arms. Before leaving, she turned to David and murmured, David. Son. David looked at her for a long time and answered, You stopped being my mother the day you chose to cover for them. She broke down crying again, but this time, no one ran to comfort her. The next day, the failed engagement dominated the headlines. The press no longer talked about the lovesick widow, but about the truth behind the mystery of the Red Horizon. The authorities continued the investigation. Those who accepted bribes went to testify, and Ray Davis was captured a few days later after being on the run. North Star Shipping did not sink. The bank resumed the credit lines after reviewing the new information. Some clients called to apologize, claiming they had received false rumors. I simply replied, Long-term business requires trust and sincerity. I hope in the future you look at the truth and are not guided by rumors. I continued assuming the executive role temporarily while David resumed his life with constant help from Dr. Claire. He didn't remember everything yet. There were days when he was lucid, and others when he would stay a long time by the window, looking out at the waves, searching his memory for some of those pieces the current had taken away. But every day he said my name with a little more naturalness. Sarah, did you have breakfast yet? Sarah, can I go out for a bit today? Sarah, I remember that beef stew you used to cook for me. Small sentences that, every time I heard them, made my chest fill with warmth. People say marriage is a bond for life. Sometimes that bond isn't made of giant promises or expensive dinners. It's made of someone willing to wait, and another willing to make the effort to return home. We invited Granny Rose and little Leo to the shipping headquarters. I didn't frame it as charity for the poor. I spoke in front of all the company employees. They are the benefactors of my family and of North Star. Without Mrs. Rose and without Leo, our true CEO would never have returned. Leo looked at the floor with his ears red as tomatoes. Granny Rose just smiled, showing the wrinkles around her mouth. I didn't do anything extraordinary, Mrs. Sarah. Someone arrives half dead at your doorstep, and if he's breathing, well, you help him. In my town, everyone would do the same. I felt a knot in my throat hearing her. There were people so poor in money, but with a heart so immense, that not even with all the wealth in the world could some people buy it. A month later, we returned to the cemetery by the sea. It was a very clear day, with no drizzle or freezing wind. The sun illuminated the tops of the pines, and the murmur of the water seemed softer. I carried a clean towel in my purse, but this time I didn't have to clean any photograph. It was David himself who stood for a long time in front of his cenotaph, reading the headstone that bore his name. He spoke in a low voice. During these 3 years, you were coming to this place alone. I nodded. Yes. I would stay here telling you things about work. I even told you about the days when I was so exhausted I wanted to drop everything. He turned to me with reddened eyes. Forgive me. I let you carry all this for too long. I pried the photo off the headstone and hugged it to my chest. That glass that had been with me on days of sun and storm, that I had cleaned while crying countless times. Now, holding it in my hands, I didn't feel cold at all. That you have returned is enough. David held out his hand to me and gripped it tightly. This time, his hand wasn't trembling. The wind blew through the pines gently, very different from the other days. The empty grave would remain there, but from then on, it would no longer be a monument to a lie. It would only be a reminder that even for someone trapped in the deepest darkness, as long as there is another person who refuses to give up, the light always ends up finding its way back. In this life, money can blind many, but love and honesty are the only anchors that prevent a family from suffering a shipwreck. Sometimes the good guys have to suffer first, but fate doesn't abandon forever those who have a clean heart. If this story has touched your hearts, leave a like, a comment, and follow our channel. Thank you for listening. I wish you much peace and health. See you in the next story.